Hey guys! Tonight we wander into a realm where mountains fold like the ridges of a giant's clenched hand, where wind cuts sharp through narrow valleys, and where long-forgotten empires left behind whispers carved in stone. You stand at the edge of the Hindu Kush, twilight painting the peaks in a violet haze, the sky stretching endlessly above you. It feels quiet now, but centuries ago this was a stage for ambition, faith, and the kind of politics that could make even your tax accountant look reasonable. You probably wouldn't survive long up here without a strong horse, thick cloak, and maybe an army or two. But don't worry, in this story you'll be perfectly safe. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step onto a winding path through the mountains, a track beaten flat by centuries of hooves, sandals, and wheels. The Hindu Kush looms around you like a fortress of stone. Sharp ridges scrape at the horizon, while valleys drop away into shadow. The cold air smells faintly of snow and pine resin, though a dusting of sand reminds you that deserts are not far away. Traveling here feels like being swallowed into a labyrinth, one that humans have tried to tame for millennia, with varying degrees of success. The Ghurids begin here, in these rugged hills. Neutral historians tell us they were originally a clan of mountain chieftains, obscure enough that earlier chronicles barely bothered to note their existence. One mainstream fact stands firm. By the 12th century, they had clawed their way from provincial obscurity into a power that spanned from eastern Iran to northern India. Not bad for people whose homeland could barely grow enough grain to fill a salad bowl. You keep walking as twilight deepens, your steps echoing against rock. The silence is broken only by the occasional shepherd's call drifting from unseen ridges. You picture how the Ghurids must have seemed at first, hill people, sometimes vassals of the Ghaznavids, sometimes rebels, always stubborn. Their valleys were dotted with forts rather than palaces, with smoke curling from low houses that huddled close together against winter's bite. It wasn't exactly beachfront property. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some legends say the name Ghurid itself means from the mountains in Persian. Obvious, sure, but it gave later writers a chance to paint them as rugged mountaineers who could outlast softer city folk. Whether that's a fair description or just medieval branding, who knows? You smile, thinking how many real estate agents today would probably call this region a rustic fixer-upper with endless mountain views. Night creeps in, and the path bends toward a pass where wind whistles like a flute through jagged stone teeth. You pause, noticing how the sky above you has gone from indigo to star-splattered black. Traveling here at night would be madness. Even modern hikers admit the Hindu Kush is no picnic. One wrong step and you're rolling downhill faster than a dropped kebab. And yet, caravans did it, soldiers did it, pilgrims did it, all driven by the belief that beyond these ridges lay fortunes or faith worth the risk. Historians still argue whether the Ghurids were first shaped more by tribal independence or by Persian Islamic influence trickling in from Herat and Ghazni. Did the mountains harden their political style, or did the cities inspire them to look outward? You breathe in the thin air, and it seems like the stones themselves are holding back the answer. You keep going, and now torches flicker ahead in your imagination, shadows of past caravans. Traders would have led camels heavy with salt, cloth, or spices. Soldiers tramped with spears angled upward like a field of reeds. And somewhere among them, perhaps, a young chieftain of the Ghurids dreamed of building more than mountain forts. He dreamed of mosques, of cities, of conquests that would make the world remember a name almost nobody cared to write down before. The pass widens suddenly, and you find yourself looking down into a valley where river light glimmers in the moon's pale shine. It feels like a doorway, one that has swallowed countless generations. You stand on this ridge, chilled but alive, and realize this is how their story begins, in a land so harsh it either breaks you or sharpens you into steel. One final joke drifts through your thoughts. If medieval Yelp had existed, the Ghurid homeland would have had about 2 stars. Beautiful views, terrible farming, constant raids would not recommend, unless you're planning to start an empire. You step down into the valley, carrying with you the sense that something is about to awaken, something that will stretch far beyond these lonely ridges. You walk deeper into the valley where rivers cut silver paths between dark ridges. The moon hangs overhead like a watchful lantern, and each step feels as if it leads further into history's long shadow. Somewhere beyond these passes, a small clan is beginning a transformation no one expects. Tonight, you trace the faint outlines of their humble beginnings. The Ghurids are, at first, anything but glamorous. Neutral accounts describe them as mountain tribesmen, tough but poor, accustomed to eking out survival in a land where grain barely grew and winters pressed hard against the stone walls of their homes. One mainstream fact stands out. For much of their early existence, they were subordinates of the Ghurid Empire, paying tribute and occasionally supplying troops. They were the sort of people powerful empires usually underestimated, until the underestimated decided they'd had enough. As you continue along a dirt track, you imagine huts clinging to the slopes, their smoke curling upward. Goats shuffle in pens, dogs bark half-heartedly at travelers. The Ghurids were not urban princes. They were shepherds, hunters, and hardy villagers, living lives that looked more like survival than destiny. And yet destiny, as history often proves, is the sort of thing that sneaks in when no one is paying attention. A quirky tidbit drifts into your thoughts. Some Persian chroniclers claimed the Ghurids descended from ancient fire worshippers, Zoroastrians who clung to their rituals until Islam reached their valleys. Whether true or embroidered gossip, it gave later writers an excuse to paint their conversion stories as dramatic. Imagine the local PR campaign, from fire temples to Friday prayers, our grand rebranding. You pause near a bend where the ground is soft with river mud. The water hums quietly, a reminder that life here was always precarious. The Ghurids did not possess vast cities or irrigated fields like their neighbors in Herat. They had valleys, forests, and defensive crags. To them, strength lay not in luxury but in endurance. You can almost hear their elders reminding young warriors, "Stone is your ally, the mountain is your shield." Historians still argue whether the Ghurids' rise was sparked more by pressure from the Ghaznavids or by internal ambition. Were they pushed into rebellion, or did they seize opportunity when Ghazni grew weak? You find no clear answer, only echoes in the mountains around you. The trail leads you toward a crude fort, its walls little more than stacked stones reinforced with timber. It's not impressive by imperial standards, yet for a clan watching both nomads and conquerors cross their land, it is survival. Guards lean on spears, their faces weathered by frost and fatigue. You imagine their surprise if told that within a few generations their descendants would command armies stretching across half of Asia. For now, though, they are just tired men in the cold, trying to keep wolves, four-legged and human, at bay. And speaking of wolves, a light joke arises. The Ghurids probably measured time less by calendars and more by how often wolves stole their goats. If you can count your losses in sheep per season, congratulations, you're already doing medieval accounting. Moving past the fort, you notice how the valley opens into meadows dotted with flickering campfires. Families huddle together, children wrapped in blankets, elders chanting prayers. The scent of roasting meat mixes with the damp earth. This was not an empire yet, just a people, bound together by kinship, faith, and the stubborn refusal to vanish. One day, the story says, leaders among them found ambition rising like smoke from their hearths. They were done being vassals, done paying tribute, done being footnotes in the chronicles of Ghazni. The Ghurid chiefs began to sharpen their identity, to imagine themselves not merely as mountain folk, but as rulers in their own right. You continue walking as the night grows colder. Stars wheel overhead, each one sharp as if etched in glass. You wonder how often young shepherds gazed at those same stars, dreaming beyond their valleys. Did they imagine mosques rising under their patronage? Did they picture armies marching at their command? Or were they simply hoping for a year when snow didn't ruin the harvest? The trail bends again, and in the distance you glimpse the faint glow of another settlement. Its houses are low, its mosque modest. Yet, within that mosque, voices echo in Arabic, recitations of the Quran that link this isolated valley to the wider Islamic world. For the Ghurids, Faith becomes both a compass and a banner. Under its cover, their future ambitions will feel not just possible, but divinely charged. Another joke slips in gently. If you had asked a Ghaznavid noble at this time about the Ghurids, he might have shrugged and said, "Those mountain folks, they're about as threatening as my grandmother's tea set." History has a way of proving grandmothers, or at least arrogant nobles, spectacularly wrong. You linger a moment at the edge of the village, watching shadows flicker across mud walls. Life is quiet, even humble. Yet in this stillness, roots are forming. From these roots will grow not just warriors but builders, not just fighters but patrons of art and religion. Out of obscurity, the Ghurids are ready to step toward sovereignty. The air feels heavier as you walk on. Somewhere ahead, the road will split, leading either into submission or into rebellion. The Ghurids are already choosing which path to take, and you, walking their ground centuries later, can almost hear the first rumble of history gathering strength in the valleys. You move further down the valley, and the path narrows between walls of rock that rise like dark curtains. The air is colder now, crisp enough to make your breath visible in pale clouds. From behind those ridges, a new chapter of ambition stirs. Two brothers are about to step onto history's stage, and they will not leave quietly. Ghiyath al-Din Muhammad and Mu'izz al-Din Muhammad, names that will soon echo from Khorasan to Delhi. The brothers, often called Ghiyath and Mu'izz for short, emerge from the Ghurid clan like iron from stone. Neutral chroniclers describe their partnership as unusual. Ghiyath ruled the western domains, focusing on the Persian world, while Mu'izz turned his gaze eastward toward the Indian subcontinent. One mainstream fact is clear. Together, they orchestrated campaigns that transformed their obscure mountain homeland into a sprawling empire. You picture their youth in the valleys you've just crossed. One brother perhaps listening to the Quran in a humble mosque, the other staring at the horizon with restless eyes. Where others saw rocks and hardship, they saw opportunity. You walk along, imagining the brothers' footsteps echoing here, voices low in late-night discussions, plans whispered like secret prayers. A quirky tidbit floats through history. Some writers say Mu'izz, better known as Muhammad of Ghor, was once captured by Ghaznavids and sold as a slave in Nishapur, only to be ransomed back later. Whether that tale is true or embroidered legend, it gave later storytellers endless material. An emperor who might once have fetched a price in the market. Makes you wonder if the auctioneer offered a warranty. Comes with ambition included, slightly used, may conquer half of Asia. The night deepens, but torches flicker in your imagination. You see Ghiyath setting up court in Firuzkoh, their mountain capital, while Mu'izz sharpens his plans for India. The two are not rivals but complements. Ghiyath steady, Mu'izz relentless. Their alliance is a kind of duet, one voice carrying strength in the west, the other pushing boundaries eastward. You walk between their shadows, feeling the tension of destiny pulling in two directions at once. Historians still argue whether Ghiyath's diplomacy or Mu'izz's aggression mattered more in building the empire. Was it the older brother's patience that secured their realm, or the younger's daring raids? You glance at the stars, trying to imagine them debating in candlelight, one urging caution, the other urging speed, both knowing they needed each other. The trail now slopes downward into a plain, where you imagine tents of soldiers dotting the dark like tiny constellations. Fires crackle, camels groan, horses stamp their hooves. The Ghurid army, though not yet massive, carries the raw energy of men who believe their time has come. Their laughter drifts into the cold, rough, and unpolished. You smile. No one here knows they're serving in a force that future empires will study as the spark for Delhi's first dynasty. Another light joke slips in. Picture a weary soldier muttering, "We're marching again? Where to this time?" And the commander answering, "India." The soldier sighs, "That's like really far." And the commander shrugs, "Better start walking then." Medieval travel reviews were brutal. You continue walking as dawn teases the horizon. The brothers' story unfolds like a chessboard. Ghiyath moves carefully, securing control of Khorasan, negotiating with neighbors, building legitimacy. Mu'izz, meanwhile, charges into Ghazni, then across the Indus, testing his strength against Indian rulers. Their rhythm is relentless. When one pauses, the other strikes. When one struggles, the other supports. It is this strange harmony that turns their clan into empire builders. Neutral narration reminds you, it is under their joint reign that the Ghurids carve their true place in history. Ghiath's court becomes a hub of scholars and architects, while Mu'izz's campaigns lay the groundwork for what will become the Delhi Sultanate. From obscurity, they leap into prominence, shaking both Persian courts and Indian palaces. You pass through a grove where wind rattles branches like drum beats. It feels symbolic, echoes of their campaigns rolling outward. You picture Ghiath's careful treaties as steady drum beats, Mu'izz's cavalry charges as sudden thunder. Together, they create a rhythm that terrifies neighbors and fascinates historians. The brothers' rise is no accident. It is ambition, timing, and perhaps the peculiar luck of mountain men who refuse to remain forgotten. You step into the plain and look back at the ridges behind you. Somewhere back there are huts and forts where they were once unknown. Now, you stand at the threshold of their empire, and the ground itself seems to vibrate with the power of their partnership. And here's one more lighthearted aside. If family dinners in your household feel tense, just imagine the Ghurid brothers deciding who gets to conquer what. You take Khorasan, I'll take India, and no one fights over dessert. The morning sun rises, turning stone to gold, and with it, the Ghurid brothers stride forward. You walk in their wake, watching two mountain chiefs become sovereigns, their steps heavy with the weight of empires yet to be built. The plain broadens under your feet as daylight spreads across the horizon, chasing away the chill of the night. Birds wheel above the riverbanks, their calls thin and bright, and the road draws you toward a city that breathes in commerce and exhales culture. You follow the Hera Rood, its water glinting like a polished blade, until the walls of Herat rise ahead in sun-washed brick. Markets thrum, hammers ring. Someone is already arguing about the price of raisins with the kind of passion most people reserve for family reunions. You smile and step through the gate with the press of early traders, letting the city's warmth settle across your shoulders like a good cloak. You slip into the bazaar, where stalls lean toward each other like curious neighbors. Spice sellers lift copper lids so steam scented with cardamom and cumin billows into the morning air. Dyers haul skeins of wool from vats that stain their hands blue and saffron. The city feels awake in a way the high valleys never did. Under Ghurid stewardship, especially as Ghiath al-Din stabilizes Khorasan, Herat begins to bloom as an urban garden of learning and trade. One plain fact sits steady. In the late 12th and very early 13th century, Ghurid patronage supported major works at Herat's congregational mosque, setting a pattern of repair and expansion that later dynasties would keep renewing. You move past scribes seated cross-legged, their reed pens ticking like metronomes across burnished paper. A master of calligraphy arches a brow as you linger. He pretends not to notice, yet his strokes slow and widen so you can admire the geometry where ink becomes architecture. Herat, in this moment, feels less like a frontier and more like a hinge, between mountains and desert, between Persian urbanity and Ghurid will. Workshops hum, kilns throb. The city is a bell in mid-ring. A quirky tidbit travels among the potters. Some swear their richest sky-blue glaze comes from trace dust of lapis carried down from Badakhshan with caravan loads. No one can prove it, and the guildmasters guard their recipes with the suspicion of cats near fish, but the rumor adds a sparkle to every bowl. You tilt one toward the light and think, yes, that is a sky you could drink soup from. You turn a corner and almost collide with a donkey stacked with timber. The driver apologizes to you, to the donkey, and to the entire street, while a foreman waves you toward a construction site. Here, masons lay courses of fired brick in patient rhythms, palms dusted white with gypsum. An overseer taps a plan scratched on a plank, bays, aisles, arcades, the clean coo of a pointed arch. He is proud in a quiet way. Builders know that empires argue on parchment, but cities are decided by mortar. The court under Ghiath sends stipends and endowments, waqf deeds that dedicate property income to mosques and schools. You hear the cadence of jurists reciting lines of fiqh in a shaded madrasa, their teacher tapping the margin with a knuckle to keep tempo. Another plain fact follows. By the 1190s, Ghurid authority in Khorasan has grown stable enough that Herat functions as a major administrative and cultural center, with revenue and manpower directed into public works, scholarship, and the steady repair of city fabric after the usual mischief of wind, fire, and time. Historians still argue whether Herat's flowering owes more to Ghiyath's careful governance or to the river of caravan wealth diverted here by new security on roads reclaimed from rivals. Was it policy or momentum, a gardener's hand, or simply good weather at the right time? You pause where shadow pools under a colonnade and let the question breathe. The city answers with the measured clink of chisels. A call to prayer rises from a nearby minaret, its voice like a silk rope uncoiling through the air. You move with the crowd, sandals soft on baked clay, and step into a courtyard cool as a cave. Timber scaffold creeps up one side where restorers reshape cornices. Tiles in the southern arcade shimmer like wet feathers. A calm aside clarifies what your eyes already guess. Herat's congregational mosque will be made and remade across centuries. Ghurid beginnings, carted repairs after disasters, and Timurid refinements that later generations will praise as a kind of perfected grammar in brick and tile. The present work continues in that long chain of care, each layer honoring the last. A light joke slides in. The foreman swears the project will finish next spring, which in the timeless calendar of builders means when the moon learns bookkeeping. You nod solemnly, even the stones seem to smile. Back in the lanes, you pass a bookstall where a copyist displays a fresh Shahnameh, its margins alive with ink vines and tiger tails. The vendor offers a discount that somehow increases the price. Nearby, a storyteller performs verse to a ring of apprentices who pretend not to be listening. When he lands a clever couplet, they cough in unison, which is scholar speak for applause. You imagine Ghiyath's envoys strolling here, sleeves scented with ink and cedar, choosing gifts for distant allies. Empires need bridges, and not all of them are made of stone. Not everything is serene. A caravan from the west reports bandits probing the roads beyond Ghurid patrol range. A fire last month hopped across roofs like an impatient cat, yet the mood holds confident. The city believes that brick by brick it can outlast misfortune. In this, Herat reads like a manual on urban optimism. Fix what you can, cover what you cannot, and keep the kilns lit. You step into a workshop where carpenters plane cedar for doors. The master taps a lintel and talks about proportion the way a poet talks about meter. An entrance, he says, is a promise. You glance back toward the mosque gate and understand. Architecture can teach without a sermon. More context threads through your thoughts. Ghurid aesthetics favor refined brickwork. Muqarnas squinches graduate weight from square room to round dome. Patterned bands let light travel in measured steps so the eye reads space like poetry. Craftsmen experiment with glazed accents that feel like punctuation in a paragraph of clay. If words build belief, patterns build patience. Another curiosity trails the tile layers. Some locals whisper that an old fire temple once stood beneath part of the sacred quarter, its memory folded into later foundations like a scent in seasoned wood. Scholars treat the tale as unconfirmed folklore. Still, the idea persists, a reminder that cities are never only one thing. You tuck the rumor away with a shrug. Even scaffolds of imagination can help a traveler see. Afternoon ripens to gold. Tea sellers clang brass cups with the authority of minor kings. A clerk at the Waqf office stamps so many documents, his seal stone looks polished by thunder. You buy a sweet rolled-in sesame and try not to think about how many hands have already patted it into shape. The vendor assures you it is medicinal, which is also what he says about sugar in general. For a second joke to balance the ledger, consider the city's cats. They have formed an informal committee to supervise fishmongers, and their minutes are meowed with ruthless efficiency. You pass their meeting and earn a brief audit. Toward evening, the sun draws long ladders of shadow across the mosque courtyard. You stand near a pier of brick and run your fingers over grooves left by a mason's line, a ghost of workmanship you can touch. Herat, under Ghurid care, teaches a lesson the mountains could not. Faith loves a good roof, learning needs a bench, beauty requires payroll. Lanterns flare one by one, and the city inhales again, ready for night. Just outside the walls, the road slants toward the mountain capital of Firuzkoh, where policy hardens into action and edicts turn into caravans of wood, tile, and pay chests. You carry Herat's warmth in your sleeve, the scent of kilns, the murmur of classes, the quiet pride of builders who know their names may fade but their lines will remain. And for a third small joke to end the day, a harried accountant sighs that the quickest way to double the mosque budget is to fold the ledger in half. You promise not to try it and let the evening swallow the street in gentle blue. You leave the warmth of Herat's streets and follow a caravan track bending south and east. Dust rises with each hoofbeat, and the wind carries the smell of roasted millet from roadside camps. The land flattens, then swells again into ridges, a reminder that power in this region always had to travel on foot, hoof, or wheel. Ahead, the horizon grows restless, because war drums and prayer calls are about to share the same stage. The Ghurids, under the steady hand of Ghiyath and the restless ambition of Mu'iz, turn their eyes toward Ghazni. Neutral narrators remind us that Ghazni had once been the pride of another dynasty, the Ghaznavids, with its libraries, palaces, and mosques shining like gemstones on the plain. One mainstream fact stands out. In 1173, Mu'iz captured Ghazni, tearing it from the remnants of Ghaznavid hands and making it the platform for campaigns deeper into India. It was a conquest not just of territory but of prestige. Whoever held Ghazni could claim the mantle of empire. You walk through the gates of the city in your imagination, still smelling faint smoke from battles past. Some walls are scorched, but bazaars bustle with new trade. Soldiers in Ghurid colors pace the streets, proud yet wary. A man selling pomegranates mutters that he has no idea who rules this week, but as long as coins spend, he doesn't mind. Empires may rise and fall, but the fruit has to sell. A quirky tidbit floats through memory. Chroniclers note that when the Ghurids entered Ghazni, they set about repairing mosques that had been damaged by earlier strife. It wasn't just piety, it was branding. Repairing a mosque said, "We're not just warriors, we're guardians of faith." A neat way to balance conquest with construction, as if they were saying, "Sorry about the chaos, here's a fresh coat of tiles." You keep walking eastward, and the land begins to widen into the Punjab plains. Here, the Ghurid armies march in lines so long they look like rivers of dust. Cavalry with tall lances, archers carrying bows strung tight, elephants sometimes looming on the other side of the battlefield. Picture the sound. Hoofbeats like thunder, commands barked in Persian, war drums pounding so deep they shake your chest. And yet, for all the power in these campaigns, the goal was often a mosque's first prayer, rising where one had never been before. Historians still argue whether these early pushes into India were about genuine religious zeal, or simply the irresistible lure of wealth from the fertile plains. Was it faith that drove Mu'iz across the Indus, or the promise of taxes, tribute, and cities glittering with bazaars? No firm answer rests in the dust, only the echo of both motives intertwined. The road pulls you into a fortress town. On its ramparts, banners snap in the wind. Inside, masons already start sketching foundations for a prayer hall, because wherever the Ghurids conquered, a mosque often followed. A soldier jokes to his comrade, "We ride all day, we fight at night, and in the morning someone tells us to hold up a wall while they build an arch." Empires are built on exhaustion as much as ambition. You pause at a field where the grass grows high, waving like a green sea. Imagine Mu'iz's horse galloping through, his cloak snapping behind him, eyes fixed on the eastern horizon. He knows that to rule Ghazni is not enough. He wants Delhi, he wants Lahore, he wants the keys to India's north. You follow his gaze, and the plain stretches forever, dotted with villages that have no idea an empire is about to sweep over them. A moment of humor creeps in again. One villager probably saw the dust of cavalry and sighed, "Great, another empire. Let's hope this one at least fixes the road." History rarely asked local farmers for Yelp reviews, though if it had, the comment section would be brutal. You walk on as the heat thickens and the Ghurid banners ripple in the distance. Behind each victory lies not just blood and stone, but also new lines in architectural memory. Ghazni's mosques repaired, Lahore's foundations altered, Delhi soon to echo with the first Friday prayers under Ghurid patronage. The sword and the minaret, moving in tandem, steel clears the way, and then stone claims the ground. Neutral narration clarifies. The Ghurids campaigns were not merely plunder raids. They created administrative footholds, leaving behind governors, garrisons, and above all, mosques. This layering of power, military, political, spiritual, allowed their conquests to outlast their own lifetimes. From these steps would grow the Delhi Sultanate, one of the great Islamic empires of South Asia. The plain darkens as sunset pours red across the sky. The soldiers pitch tents, the imams light lamps, and the faint outline of a new mosque rises in the glow of torches. You stand at the edge, watching men hammer stakes, draw plans, and chant prayers. For a moment, it feels as if conquest and construction are the same rhythm, destruction and devotion braided together like strands of rope. And for one final jest before night, you imagine a tired soldier leaning on his spear and muttering, "We've marched 300 miles, and all I got was this minaret." Not a bad souvenir, though. Most empires left less behind. You drift with the campfires, listening to voices fade into the night. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Delhi waits, unaware of the footsteps already marching toward it. You leave the smoke of the campfires and follow a caravan path back into the mountains. The plains fade behind you, and the air sharpens again, thin and cold, carrying the scent of snow. Here, far from Ghazni or Lahore, the Ghurids built something quieter but no less ambitious, their mountain capital, Firuzkoh. The city itself is gone now, swallowed by time and stone, but you walk as if through its ghost. The road climbs, switchback after switchback, until you reach a plateau hemmed in by jagged ridges. Picture a citadel rising from the rock like a clenched fist. Neutral narration confirms. Firuzkoh was the dynastic seat of Ghiyath al-Din Muhammad, perched deep in the Ghor mountains. From here, he and his brother Mu'iz issued decrees that traveled as far as Khorasan and the Gangetic Plain. It was not an easy capital, but it was theirs, remote enough to be defensible, high enough to feel eternal. You step inside the vanished city in your imagination. Streets of compacted earth wind between wooden balconies. The smell of smoke and lamb stew curls from kitchens. In the central square, masons haul bricks, architects unfurl parchment, and the outlines of mosques take shape. One mainstream fact: Ghiyath commissioned mosques and palaces in Firuzkoh, though little survives today beyond scattered ruins. Chroniclers remembered the city as a proud symbol of Ghurid power before Mongol fury reduced it to dust. A quirky tidbit drifts your way. Some medieval sources claimed Firuzkoh's Friday Mosque once glistened with turquoise tiles, brought in caravans over the most treacherous passes. Whether fact or exaggeration, the idea of shimmering domes perched high among snow-covered ridges feels almost unreal, like a jewel hidden in stone. You imagine travelers gasping at the sight, then immediately wondering how on earth the builders got the tiles up there without sprouting wings. You wander further, past a wooden bridge strung across a gorge where water foams below. Soldiers tramp across, their armor clanking, their cloaks snapping in the mountain wind. Firuzkoh was never as cosmopolitan as Herat, but it had its own hum. Scribes scratching letters for distant governors, caravans unloading timber, imams leading prayers beneath half-finished arches. It was a city built on stubbornness, the audacity of saying, "Yes, we can carve an empire's capital out of this cliff." Historians still argue whether Firuzkoh was chosen for its strategic safety or for its symbolic remoteness. Was it practical geography, or was it meant to remind subjects that power came from the mountain heartland? You stand on a ridge and let the question hang in the wind, unanswered except by the cry of a hawk circling overhead. In your mind, the Great Friday Mosque rises. Its dome curves like a frozen wave, while slender minarets climb upward as if racing the peaks. Builders shout across scaffolds, stones thud into place. The call to prayer rolls down the valley, echoing between cliffs until it sounds as though the mountains themselves are chanting. Faith here is not background. It is architecture carved into sky. You chuckle at a mason balancing precariously on a beam. He yells down, "If I fall, tell my wife I was working on the highest project in the empire." A foreman replies, "If you fall, she already knows." Laughter drifts upward with the dust. You pass a madrasa where young students huddle against the cold, their ink freezing in pots if left unattended. Their teacher insists that hardship sharpens the mind, though most of the boys look like they'd rather sharpen a fire instead. A donkey brays outside, perhaps in agreement. Empires may glitter in marble, but most of the work gets done with numb fingers and stubborn hearts. As you climb higher through Firuzku's lanes, you sense how this city balanced fragility and grandeur. One avalanche, one earthquake, one enemy raid, and all of it could vanish. Yet while it stood, it embodied the Ghurids' transformation, from tribal chiefs to monarchs who dared to plant mosques and palaces on mountaintops. You stand in the ruins, feeling both awe and melancholy, as though the stones themselves still hum with unfinished prayers. Another light joke settles in. If Firuzku had a tourist brochure, it might read, "Great views, impossible stairs, bring your own oxygen." You grin, but your breath catches. The climb is steep enough to make the joke real. Evening falls, and the peaks turn purple against a fading sky. Fires glow in courtyards, families gather under wooden beams, and the minarets cast long shadows across the valley floor. You linger at the edge of the mosque square, watching lanterns flicker against brickwork now long vanished. The city may be forgotten, but tonight, walking through its ghost, you feel it alive. Dawn slides over the ridgelines and pours like pale copper into the valley of Firuzku. You wake to the racket of bells and hooves, to muleteers calling out names as if herding stars back into constellations. The air smells of thawing frost, wool grease, and bread pulled from clay ovens. You follow the clamor to the outer gate where the first caravans file in, animals stepping small and careful on the cobbles. The mountains may hide this capital from the world, but the world finds it anyway. Spices, paper, glass, iron, and stories riding side by side. Inside, the city arranges itself into courtyards the way a poem arranges into couplets. Caravanserais open their wooden jaws to swallow loads and release laughter. A stable boy loops a rope through a camel's nose peg, then bows like he has just greeted a duke. You keep to the wall as porters sweep past with bales of indigo cloth. Traders cross-check tallies. A baker shouts that his sesame rings will cool themselves if buyers prefer to sleep all morning. The place runs on coin and custom. Under the Ghurids, these courtyards are the empire's lungs. They draw in goods and exhale revenue, gossip and faith. Neutral narration steadies the scene. By the late 12th century, Ghurid rule controls vital corridors from Khorasan across Ghazni to the Punjab, making safer passage for caravans, scholars, and envoys. That is a plain fact. Security attracts movement, and movement becomes profit. The mosques, schools, and workshops you've seen are not accidents. They are the visible grammar of order. You step through the arch of a caravanserai. The courtyard is a rectangle of sun with rooms stacked around it, each door the mouth of a different region. A Khwarezmian trader counts silver dirhams into his palm. A man from Multan shows indigo so deep it leans toward night. A coppersmith from Nishapur turns a bowl and listens for the note that means the metal has agreed to be beautiful. A scribe scratches receipts with a reed pen, pausing only to warm his fingers over a brazier. He grumbles that ink freezes faster than debts, which earns sympathetic laughter, and more helpfully, a cup of tea. A quirky tidbit circulates whenever fingers thaw. Some travelers swear one-way station near here had floors warmed by a hidden channel of spring water, a mountain improvisation on bathhouse heating. No proof survives, but the rumor refuses to die. Perhaps because everyone wants to believe comfort can be engineered even at altitude. You wiggle your toes and decide the legend is good for morale if not for thermodynamics. Across the yard, an elderly merchant unrolls a map that looks like it has met rain, sun, and at least one goat. He traces routes with a chipped fingernail, Herat for books and dyes, Balkh for grain, Ghazni for armor, Lahore for fabrics that drape like water. He taps Firuzku last, smiling. The mountain keeps its promises, he says, which is merchant code for guards are paid and disputes are judged fast. Historians still argue whether the Ghurids actively redirected trade toward their heartland with incentives and patrols, or whether commerce simply followed the new military spine that their conquests created. Policy or momentum, decree or gravity. You let the question float over the courtyard like a gull over a harbor and watch it circle without landing. A young faqih threads through the crowd balancing a stack of law texts wider than his torso. He angles toward the madrasa tucked beside the caravanserai, because in Ghurid cities, the grammar of commerce and the grammar of scholarship share a wall. Endowments, waqf deeds pledged by princes and merchants, keep lamps burning over reading benches. This, too, is a plain fact. Ghurid patronage sustains mosques and madrasas from Herat to Ghazni and the mountain towns between, tying legal training, Quranic recitation, and logistics into a single civic weave. You slip into the madrasa courtyard. It smells of wet stone and ink. A teacher draws a diagram of contracts on a plastered wall with charcoal, then wipes a corner with his sleeve when a student objects. The debate is polite and relentless. A jar of walnuts makes the rounds as intellectual fuel. One student cracks 3 in a row and announces that this proves the doctrine of easy provision. His classmates inform him it proves only good wrist technique. Scholarship meets snack time. Back in the caravanserai, a cloth broker unfurls a bolt striped like sunrise. A buyer strokes it and asks if the dyes will run. The broker says the colors are as steadfast as the stars, then adds, more realistically, hand wash only. A joke drifts up from the loading bay. If you can't lift the bale, you probably can't afford it. Nobody argues. Neutral context slides in with the afternoon light. Coins bearing Ghurid legends circulate through these yards, and tax clerks record not only volume but origin, standardizing dues so that caravans don't pay the same toll 3 times for one mistake. Bureaucracy rarely sings, yet you hear its melody in the smoothness of traffic and the confidence with which people hand strangers their goods. Empire is the art of predictable promises. A scholar with henned beard stands by the inner arch telling a story from hadith between transactions. People slow to listen because a good chain of narration beats a bad bargain for sheer pleasure. He quotes, then unspools commentary, then ties it to the law of agency and surety. And just like that, the courtyard's chatter becomes a seminar, the marketplace a classroom. You realize the obvious. Caravans carry more than things. They carry arguments, styles, melodies, and jokes. The empire expands not only by marching, but by borrowing ideas that arrived on a mule and stayed for tea. For levity, a porter negotiates hazard pay for carrying ginger because it bites the nose. The foreman counters with a raise payable in cookies. A compromise is reached, which, like most compromises, involves more work and the same pay, but at least comes with cookies. You wander to the mosque that anchors the block. In its shade, a judge hears a dispute over a cracked jar. The plaintiff speaks first, the defendant swears the damage existed before sale, and a witness produces the shard that matches the missing chip. The judge's ruling is brisk, fair, and, as the murmurs attest, expected. This predictability is why caravans return. One mainstream fact underscores the scene. Islamic courts throughout the region adjudicate commercial cases with established procedures, and the Ghurid administration, keen on revenue, upholds the system to keep the wheels turning. Evening folds the edges of the sky. Lamps flare along the arcade, and the courtyard turns amber. A musician plucks a cedar near the gate, and the notes float like moths over ledgers. A young poet recites a few lines about distance, price, and the way love and commerce both insist on exchange. He is paid with applause and a small pouch of almonds, which is better than exposure and nearly as useful as coin. You lean against warm brick and watch the last beasts settle. The city exhales. Commerce has been counted, contracts sealed, the night watch posted. Across the lane, the madrasa windows glow as students memorize by lamplight, their lips moving in quiet tides. This is how a mountain capital beats. Courtyard to courtyard, account to argument, the useful and the beautiful taking turns across the same paving stones. A final joke for the ledger. The innkeeper posts a sign that reads, "No credit. Tomorrow never arrives." Every merchant nods as if hearing revelation. Tomorrow will arrive, of course, with new animals, new books, new debates, and new numbers to argue over. For now, you let the lamps blur into constellations and listen to Firuzkoh fall asleep, cradled by its courtyards and the long, patient breath of its caravans. The lamps of Firuzkoh fade behind you as the road tips east. down from saw-toothed ridges into warmer plains where the air smells of dust and mango leaves. You move with a small convoy of scribes and stonecutters, the sort of company that can argue about vowels for 10 miles and then lift a lintel like it owes them money. Days stretch, rivers widen, and the horizon flattens into a pale band that seems to slide away as you walk. When the first ruined ramparts appear, broken teeth in the grass, you know you've reached the threshold of a city whose voice is about to change pitch. Delhi waits in heat haze, half fort and half rumor. You pass through outer earthworks toward an older stone enclosure locals call Kila Rai Pithra, where thorn trees clutch at the walls and parrots heckle everyone with the confidence of unpaid supervisors. The streets, such as they are, bend around courtyards and wells, traders drift like shoals, and somewhere a hammer rings time against a chisel. You taste grit on your tongue and think, yes, this is a place that will insist on being built, rebuilt, and renamed until maps give up and just point. Neutral narration steadies your steps. After victories in the late 12th century, most famously Mu'izz al-Din Muhammad's triumph over the Chahamanas near Tehran in 1192, Ghurid authority pushes to the Delhi region. One plain fact follows. Qutb al-Din Aibak, Mu'izz's trusted commander, establishes control here and begins the congregational mosque known as the Quwwatul Islam around 1193, fixing the Friday prayer to new power on old ground. This is not a whisper. It's a bell struck in stone. You join a line of laborers carrying dressed blocks into a walled yard where stonemasons plot arcades with strings and sun shadows. The plan is brisk and confident, a broad courtyard, cloistered aisles, a prayer wall locking the geometry toward Mecca. Chisels tap the rhythm of resolve. Ibak's overseer speaks a blend of command and coaxing. Pay chests on time, guards at the gates, waterskins for the crews, and no arguing with the imams about the exact curve of the mihrab unless you enjoy paperwork. A quirky tidbit passes among the work gangs like a shared fig. Some say the first arcades borrow carved pillars and lintels from earlier temples in and around the fort, their vine scrolls and bell capitals reseated into new alignments. Whether you read that as thrift, speed, or deliberate symbolism, the result is a palimpsest. Old motifs carrying new meanings under the noon glare. A mason runs his thumb over a lotus, then flips the stone and beds it in mortar without comment. The courtyard does not erase, it rearranges. Historians still argue whether this reuse was primarily a practical salvage in a city of urgent projects or a crafted statement of supremacy intended to speak through every column. The debate ricochets between inscription and interpretation, between what the sources claim and what the stones confess when the light skims their faces at dusk. You hold both possibilities in your palms like two weights that balance. By late afternoon, the prayer niche rises, and an imam, dusty and delighted, tests the acoustics with a line of recitation that floats into the hot air like cool water poured from height. You feel the sound lean against brick and return, soft but sure. A scribe near you notes the moment on a wooden tablet with a flair that suggests future readers and possibly future promotions. The practical chemistry of empire, faith, record, payroll, clicks again into place. Beyond the mosque yard, foundations mark a circle where a miner will climb. Overseers pace its circumference, arguing about batter, courses, and how much the tower should taper to convince the sky to cooperate. One mainstream fact folds in. Qutb al-Din Aibak launches the Great Minaret here at the end of the 1190s, a project his successor Iltutmish will continue skyward. The tower wants to be both lighthouse and proclamation, a vertical line that says prayers rise from this ground and do not stop. You watch a surveyor sight along a cord and swear softly as a pigeon sits on his plumb bob, proving that even gravity has critics. First light joke of the day, the Masons propose a union for pigeons with strict no-perching clauses. The pigeons vote no by unanimous coup. As scaffolds rise, contract crews argue about brick versus stone for certain courses. Aibak's chief decides for stone at the base, brick in some upper sections, then changes his mind after the afternoon wind demonstrates how Delhi edits bad decisions with sand. Second light joke. A cart driver declares Delhi dust to be a condiment and asks if anyone would like their figs with extra nation building. No takers, but the line gets a laugh. You walk the edge of the compound where an iron pillar stands with its own quiet gravity, older than all this, its surface dark and strangely unbothered by rust. Neutral aside, the pillar predates the new mosque by many centuries, a relic of earlier kings whose metallurgists somehow fashioned an alloy that shrugs at weather. Visitors test it with their palms, as if checking the city's long pulse. A guard, bored but philosophic, says the pillar has heard more prayers than anyone minbar. You believe him. Twilight cools the stones. The first autumn from the new courtyard curls over thorn trees and resting oxen, and the sound feels like wet clay pressed into a mold that fits exactly. People glance up, count heartbeats, and answer by gathering. For many, this is the first time Friday will be kept here with the full ceremony of a major city. In that knowledge, the tiles seem brighter, the mortar sweeter. Ibak inspects the lines, nods once, and leaves without drama. This, too, is part of the craft, to let the building speak and not the builder. Another curiosity lingers in the street talk. Some claim the miner is named as much for a beloved Sufi, Qutb al-Din Bakhtiar Kaki, as for its patron Ibak, a rumor that turns at the hinge of devotion and dynastic pride. No certainty settles it. Names like rivers can feed several fields at once. You note the ambiguity with a quiet smile. Cities rarely insist on one story when two will keep the tea hot. Even as prayer concludes, carts creak with more stone, and scribes review consignment lists by lamplight. This is Delhi's trick. Never quite finished, always already expanding. A honeycomb of workshops buds along the walls, calligraphers laying out bands for Quranic inscription, carvers rehearsing an alphabet of leaves and knots, brick burners coaxing color from flame. When the wind shifts, the whole place smells like clay, about to remember that it was once a mountain. Third light joke glides in as a foreman swears the miner will be done by next monsoon. A laborer replies, "Which monsoon?" The foreman says, "Yes." Work resumes with renewed efficiency and fresh skepticism. You step back through the gate and stand where dusk turns the new mosque's edges to ink. The city hums at a lower pitch now, cooks ladling lentils, guards trading passwords that sound like riddles, children playing a game that requires more arguing than rules. Somewhere a poet is already trying out lines that make the tower a metaphor for patience. You feel the echo begin, a murmur that will call other rulers to this ground. Other courts, other dynasties. The courtyard is a seed, and the city, stubborn as a thorn tree, will keep sprouting from it. The night air gathers. You think of mountain passes and caravan courtyards and how this new prayer hall binds them with a single arc of intention. The first echo has been cast. What it returns will be generations of rulers, visions of law, parades of ambition, and morning after morning of ordinary worshippers tying their sandals, stepping across the threshold and filling the space with breath. You listen as the silence after evening prayer folds over the stones and holds. Somewhere inside that quiet, an empire rehearses its voice. The night around Delhi softens into a quilt of sounds. Oxen sighing in their sleep, distant dogs rehearsing an opera no one asked for, and the low murmur of guards swapping jokes under their breath. You walk through narrow lanes, the air warm and sticky with the scent of clay ovens cooling after a long day. The mosque stands behind you, its fresh stones glowing faintly in starlight, and ahead lies a city that is not yet sure what kind of skin it wears. Delhi at this moment is less a capital than a crossroads, and the Ghurid presence must weave its way into the tapestry of lives already rooted here. Neutral narration steadies your view. By the late 12th century, northern India is a patchwork of faiths and practices, Sunni Islam, older Buddhist traditions still clinging in pockets, thriving Hindu communities, and the quiet but persistent rhythms of local cults and seasonal festivals. That is a plain fact. Diversity was not a side note but the baseline. You step into a market lane where, even at night, the chatter has not ended. Merchants light small oil lamps to guard their wares. You see turmeric piled like gold dust, sugarcane stacked like spears, garlands of jasmine drooping across a wooden beam. A group of pilgrims drifts past, their chants rising in cadence that feels less like commerce and more like breathing with the earth. Here, the Ghurid imprint is delicate and heavy all at once. A mosque anchors prayer, yet around it, Temple bells still chime at dawn, and yogis fold themselves into silence near the riverbank. Historians still argue whether the Ghurid rulers sought true integration with these varied communities or simply laid administrative weight over the top, leaving religious diversity to carry on beneath. You tilt your head at the question, it lingers like incense that refuses to burn out. A quirky tidbit flickers in from the local gossip. Some chroniclers later claimed that certain Delhi households in the early Ghurid era had kitchens that served both goat stew and lentil porridge from the same fire, a culinary truce of faiths sharing a single hearth. No one has found the recipe, but the story smells true as you catch the night breeze filled with spice and smoke. You pass into a quarter where Sufi mystics have hung simple lamps along a veranda. Inside, the air quivers with the hum of zikr, the remembrance of God repeated until voices blur into a single breath. People of all kinds wander in, merchants, travelers, even curious children, drawn by the music of devotion. A dervish catches your eye, his smile wide enough to ignore differences of creed, and motions you inside. For a moment, the city feels less divided, more like a single heartbeat wearing many clothes. First light joke of the night. Outside the Sufi lodge, a beggar calls out, "Give for the sake of God, and I'll even pray for your donkey." Someone drops a coin. The donkey brays, perhaps in gratitude, perhaps in complaint. As you continue, the air grows thick with drums. A marriage procession winds down the lane, torches flaring, musicians hammering rhythms that pull you along like a current. Women scatter flower petals, men balance gifts wrapped in cloth, and children run in circles as if their job is to tire the stars. A new mosque might rise, but weddings and festivals still beat the same pulse Delhi has known for centuries. The city adjusts. It does not erase. Neutral narration clarifies. The Ghurid administrators, through men like Qutb al-Din Aibak, levy taxes, appoint judges, and assign garrisons. But in daily life, local customs and religious practices continue. The balance between new rulers and old habits is uneasy, but it holds, stitched together by markets and necessity. Second joke arrives as you wander into a potter's quarter. A craftsman, splattered head to toe with clay, holds up a crooked bowl and announces, "Perfect for a man with a crooked appetite." His neighbor replies, "Then you should sell it to half the city." Laughter clinks like pots drying in rows. Near the Yamuna River, the moon ripples on dark water. Bathers descend stone steps with offerings of flowers. Across the bank, a group of Ghurid soldiers stand watch, their armor glinting faintly. One yawns, another shifts, clearly wishing for a bed rather than duty. The juxtaposition feels sharp. Faith rituals on one side, foreign garrisons on the other, each claiming the city in their own way. And yet, Delhi is not just division. The river reflects all of it at once, the chant, the call, the guard, the garland, each light wavering but together forming a sheet of silver. You stand by the water, realizing that the Ghurid Empire is building more than walls. It is building a space where differences rub shoulders every hour. Another curiosity surfaces. Later travelers said Delhi under Ghurid and early Sultanate rule had neighborhoods where music never stopped, where one lane heard temple bells at dawn, another echoed with Quranic recitation, and another swayed with folk songs of wandering bards. The truth of that is slippery, but as you walk back through the night, the city does feel like a quilt sewn from many melodies. Third and final joke slips in at a food stall. A cook brags that his kebabs are famous from Herat to the Ganges. A passerby replies, "Then why are you still selling them for 2 coins? The cook shrugs, "Because my wife says fame doesn't pay rent." History nods in agreement. The night thickens. Lamps gutter. The minaret of Quwwatul Islam pierces the stars half-built, a silhouette of ambition. Around it, the city sleeps uneasily, half old, half new, stitched by faiths, stories, and the stubborn endurance of daily life. You step into the hush, aware that this mosaic of belief and custom is both fragile and resilient. Fragile because empires demand conformity, resilient because people always find ways to fold difference into rhythm. The moon sinks behind Delhi's ramparts, and dawn slides along the Yamuna like a thin ribbon of brass. You hear roosters miscalculate the hour, a donkey contribute editorial comments, and somewhere inside the Quwwatul Islam compound, a foreman clap his hands for the first shift. You step into that gray light as riders gather at the gate, men who began life as slaves in distant courts and now carry writs that bend cities. Their saddlebags hold pay lists, building schedules, and letters that start with blessings and end with deadlines. You watch them peel off toward different horizons, the Ghurid map turned into hoofbeats. Neutral narration steadies the scene. The empire's eastward reach depends on Ghulam commanders, Qutb al-Din Aibak in Delhi and Lahore, Ikhtiyar al-Dun, Muhammad Bakhtiar Khalja, driving toward Bihar and Bengal, and other lieutenants such as Taj al-Din Yildiz in Ghazni and Nasir al-Din Qubacha in Sindh. One plain fact follows. These former slaves consolidate Ghurid power after Mu'izz's victories, and before long, plant the roots of what will become the Delhi Sultanate. You ride in their dust in your mind. Aibak's column heads northwest first, back through Lahore, where mosques need repair and garrisons need pay. Clerks bump along in ox carts, bickering about whether the ledger prefers dust or ink. The ledger votes for both. At each stop, a pattern repeats. A khutbah is read in the ruler's name, a qadi sits under an awning with his inkwell, and masons mark a wall for a mihrab. Power arrives with payroll and prayer schedule. A quirky tidbit clings to Aibak's name like a tassel. Later storytellers call him Lak Baksh, the giver of lakhs, for a habit of generous gifts to soldiers and scholars. Maybe it is courtly PR, maybe it is true. Either way, the nickname travels faster than any tax edict and makes even stonecutters smile while lifting lintels. You picture a paymaster sighing, "He gives away money so quickly I have to sharpen my pen twice a day." No one complains, except perhaps the pen. South and east, Bakhtiar Khalja drives lean cavalry across the Ganges plain with a speed that makes larger armies look like furniture. Forts blink and change flags. Towns accept new tax scales like people accept weather, with grumbling adjustments and a continued need to sell onions. Neutral aside, around 1202 Bakhtiar seizes Bihar and presses into Bengal, setting up rule at Lakhnauti, Ghor. Chronicles also link his name to the ruin of famed Buddhist institutions in Bihar. Later accounts differ in detail, but all agree a long-standing scholarly world there fades under new winds. You keep the imagery soft, shelves emptied, courtyards silent, teachers wandering to safer towns where their books will be read again. Historians still argue whether these commanders followed a coherent Ghurid program or acted from personal ambition the moment distance gave them space. Was there a plan that stretched from Firuzkoh to the Bay of Bengal, or did opportunity sketch the map on the run? The question rides beside you like a second horse, never quite matching pace. Back in Delhi, Aibak's builders keep a steady drumbeat. The miners' lower stories rise course by course. Stonemasons squint along plumb lines as if convincing the sky to stand still. Aibak sends notes with 3 favorite directives: finish the arcade, settle the rural assessments, and keep the roads quiet. The notes return with 3 familiar replies: nearly finished, almost settled, and reasonably quiet, phrases that mean send more lime, more cash, and more guards. First light joke of the morning. A courier gallops east with orders that simply read, "Make it taller." He returns a week later with a question mark the size of a battlement. News from Ajmer buzzes through the workshops. The old heartland of the Chahamanas becomes a Ghurid node, and the mosque at Adhaidan Kajonpra takes shape under Aibak's watch, its carved screens and repurposed pillars knitting new ritual to older stone. You walk through that imagined courtyard and feel the hush that follows a call to prayer when people stand shoulder to shoulder and differences set themselves down for a few breaths. The masons argue softly about symmetry. Symmetry argues back. Far to the southwest, in Sindh, Qubacha watches the Indus change channels the way arguments change minds. He garrisons towns, coaxes river tolls into predictable shapes, and petitions for a share of elephants, because nothing announces government like a large, persuasive herbivore. Second joke, offered by a quartermaster rubbing his temples. We have shoes for horses, shoes for men, and for elephants we have paperwork. The web stretches thin and strong. Caravan routes feel safer. Qadis learn local dialects. Tax clerks swap abacus methods with money changers who calculate faster than pigeons reproduce. The congregational mosques in these new nodes do more than gather prayer. They anchor law courts, store contracts, and teach recitation to children who will later argue with their parents about metered grammar. Neutral narration adds another plain fact. The Iqtiyah system, assigning revenue rights from land to military officers, helps fund garrisons and public works, binding the army's stomach to the countryside's harvest. It is not poetry, but it keeps the roof tiles dry. Along the Ganges, Bakhtiar's camps learn monsoon etiquette the hard way. Tents sag, fires sulk. A scribe holds a palm leaf charter over a brazier until the letters rise from damp like a rescued song. Third joke bubbles up when a cavalryman asks if rain counts as enemy action. The answer is yes, but you may not negotiate with it. At day's end, you climb a low rise outside Delhi and look back. The miner's shadow stretches like an exclamation mark lying on its side. Bells ring from city lanes where older worship continues, and from the mosque yard, the adhan pours out with that same steady kindness you heard on the first day. What feels new is the web around it. Administrators from Ghor and Ghazni settling into Indian towns, jurists moderating disputes between guilds and garrisons, and teams of builders carrying Ghurid habits of brick and script into climates that demand improvisation. Another curiosity drifts into camp gossip. Some insist Aibak plays Chavgan, the polo of princes, whenever business allows, flying down a dusty field with a grin that terrifies both ball and spectators. The tale ends sadly in later years, but for now it's only a picture of a general who rides hard in sport and state alike. You fold the anecdote away as a human crease in a ledger of stone. The sun tips toward evening. Messengers switch horses. A squad of craftsmen leaves for Lahore with wooden boxes of carved Quranic bands wrapped in oiled cloth, like sentences traveling to find their walls. You breathe in dust, lime, and the faint sweetness of jaggery from a street boiler. The city feels young and rehearsing, the way a chorus hums before the curtain rises. These slave generals are not merely holding ground, they are turning campaigns into addresses, addresses into districts, and districts into memories written in brick. You step down from the rise as lanterns brighten. Somewhere, a clerk declares triumph because two copies of the same tax roll finally agree with each other. Somewhere else, a child mouths her first lines of scripture, and the syllables fit like beads on a new string. Power moves outward in waves you can't quite see, but you can feel it in the certainty with which shops shutter, sentries trade passwords, and the miner's silhouette deepens against a violet sky. The men who began as possessions are writing possession into the landscape, and the letters they use are payrolls, roads, courts, and mosques that pull Friday like a tide. The violet dusk over Delhi fades into a dense, breathless night. You walk along the caravan road again, but this time the air tastes of dust left to settle, not stirred. The pace slackens. Armies that once thundered east and west pause, and the first hints of fragility creep into the mortar. Empires never collapse in one heartbeat. They fray, brick by brick, prayer by prayer. Tonight you wander among mosques that once sang loudly and now whisper in dust. Neutral narration steadies your steps. Earthquakes, raids, and shifts in power repeatedly damage Ghurid structures. One plain fact: the Friday Mosque at Ghazni, restored by Ghurid hands after earlier fires, was again wrecked by tremors and time, leaving little more than foundations by later centuries. Builders can raise domes, but mountains remind them who owns the ground. You imagine walking into Ghazni after one such quake. The bazaar is half silent, its canopies tilted. Stones litter the prayer courtyard. The mihrab that once glowed with calligraphy now wears a jagged crack. Yet an imam stands under the arch and calls the faithful anyway. A boy sweeps rubble from the steps. Faith bends, but it does not break. Still, you feel the sting, like hearing a beloved song played on a broken instrument. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some chroniclers claim that in one collapsed mosque, villagers used the fallen dome's hollow as a water cistern for years. Imagine filling your jar from what was once the sky of a prayer hall. It sounds both resourceful and heartbreaking, like recycling hope into buckets. Further west, Firuzkoh itself wavers. You walk its streets again, only this time weeds sprout between paving stones. A wall leans, a tower tilts. Rumors of Mongol raids filter through caravan gossip, and caravans do not lie. When traders take the long way around, it means safety is fled. Lanterns glow in fewer windows each night. Historians still argue whether Firuzku's decline began before the Mongols with internal weakness, or whether the Mongol onslaught was the hammer blow to a city still strong. You hear both theories in the silence between gusts of mountain wind. Back in Delhi, the Quwwat al-Islam stands, but repairs become constant. Monsoon rains eat mortar, termites gnaw scaffolds, Aibak's successors juggle campaigns, rebellions, and construction budgets like exhausted jugglers, hoping no one notices how many balls have already dropped. A tired clerk scratches out a report. Roof needs tiles, walls need plaster, miner needs coins, treasury needs miracles. First light joke of the night. A foreman insists the mosque will last forever. A pigeon immediately drops evidence to the contrary. The foreman sighs. Perhaps not forever then. You walk through Lahore's courtyard as vines creep up cracked walls. Here, the Ghurid stamp begins to fade, not vanish, just blur. Like ink washed once too many times. Worshippers still gather, but new rulers will soon carve their own names into stone. Even so, the shadow of Ghurid arches lingers, the bones of faith persisting under every layer. Neutral narration again. Many of the earliest Ghurid mosques in India survive only in fragmentary remains, arches reused, pillars swallowed into later compounds, foundations replotted by succeeding dynasties. These traces testify to impermanence. Stones speak, but empires rarely listen long. Second joke floats from a scribe brushing dust off a cracked inscription. He mutters, "If only rulers wrote shorter names, I'd have less to repair." His apprentice replies, "Or maybe write them in pencil." Both laugh, but gently, as if the stones might overhear. The road takes you to Herat once more. Here, too, fire and earthquake erase as fast as kings can endow. The mosque that glowed in Ghurid days becomes scaffolding for carded repairs, then canvas for timorous brilliance. You stand in the courtyard and realize, sometimes the most lasting gift is not permanence, but the platform for others to build upon. By midnight, you stand before the half-finished Qutba Minar. The tower stretches higher now, its ribs catching moonlight, but cracks already spider along some courses. Stones shift, birds nest, the ambition of height collides with the patience of gravity. Still, workers patch and bind, determined to keep it climbing. Third and final joke drifts in with their muttering. One mason claims he's carving his name into the mortar, so future archaeologists will blame him for the cracks. His friend laughs. By then, no one will remember who ordered this tower, but they'll curse your name daily. That, the mason says, is legacy enough. You linger under the tower's shadow. The Ghurid Empire is still alive, but its voice grows hoarse. Mosques fade under dust, capitals strain under cracks, and new powers sharpen their swords just beyond the horizon. You feel the ache of structures that once shouted glory, now reduced to murmurs. Dust settles in arches, but in the hush of the courtyard, a single prayer rises, steady as ever. Morning light slides through Delhi's haze, striking the half-finished miner until it looks like a spear planted against the sky. You walk beneath its shadow, through the mosque courtyard where yesterday's dust still clings to arches. Workers mutter about cracks and pigeons, yet scholars gather in the cloister to argue law, and worshippers press foreheads to stone polished smooth by years. Even in decay, the buildings whisper lessons. Tonight you listen to those whispers, secrets folded into brick and prayer. Neutral narration steadies your thoughts. Though many Ghurid mosques have vanished or were rebuilt by later dynasties, fragments survive that reveal design choices, pointed arches, bands of carved Kufic script, alternating red and buff stone, and early attempts at tall minarets as symbols of power. One plain fact: the Quwwat al-Islam Mosque in Delhi preserves reused temple pillars, its arcades a hybrid of styles that still puzzle and fascinate architects. You trace one such pillar in your imagination. A lotus curls beneath Quranic verses, vine scrolls twine with geometric knots. The surface reads like a conversation, older gods whispering, newer faith proclaiming, both pressed into a single silence by mortar. Historians still argue whether this blend should be seen as dominance, compromise, or simply the practical speed of construction. You press your hand to the carved stone and feel all three possibilities thrum at once. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Later visitors claimed that if you stood in the Quad courtyard at dawn, the rising sun hit certain columns in sequence, lighting them up like beads on a string. No one can prove it. Maybe it was wishful poetry. But the image lingers, light itself tracing prayers across stone. You move into the shade of the cloister, where masons left their signatures as flourishes hidden in corners, small flowers chipped into mortar, initials tucked where only spiders notice. One apprentice carved a pair of eyes at the base of a pier, perhaps to amuse himself, perhaps to suggest the mosque itself was watching. First light joke of the morning. A worshipper once tripped over that carving, shouted, "The building blinked at me," and ran home. His neighbors later teased him that faith sometimes stares back. In Ghazni, fragments still speak. Walk the ruins, and you find glazed tiles scattered like broken jewelry. A turquoise shard glimmers from rubble, as if the dome has simply fallen asleep in pieces. Neutral narration adds, archaeologists in later centuries recovered carved stucco panels, showing vegetal patterns and Quranic inscriptions typical of Ghurid taste. These fragments, though small, confirm that beauty was not an afterthought, but a deliberate voice of legitimacy. Second joke surfaces from a weary archaeologist centuries later dusting a shard. "I think I've found a whole dome," he shouts, only for it to be a goat's water bowl. Even ruins keep their sense of humor. Further west in Firuzkoh, legends whisper that tunnels ran beneath the Friday Mosque, leading to chambers where manuscripts were stored safe from snow. Whether true or not, the story tickles imagination. You picture students sneaking into those tunnels with oil lamps, reading by candlelight while wind howled above. Neutral aside, nothing of those tunnels survives, but even the rumor reveals how much the Ghurids prized both prayer and scholarship. You pause in Delhi again, gazing up at the Qutba Minar's rising tiers. Bands of Arabic calligraphy girdle its girth, Quranic verses proclaiming divine authority in stone. Some letters stretch tall, others curl like vines, the script itself becoming architecture. You wonder if masons hummed as they carved, repeating the words until sound became groove, groove became message. Third light joke wanders into the scaffolding. A mason explains to a visitor that each verse carved into the tower counts as overtime. The overseer disagrees. The mason replies, "Then may God bless me with extra patience." Laughter climbs as high as the scaffolds. Historians still argue about the symbolic weight of the miner. Was it a victory tower, a marker of faith's triumph, a call to prayer amplified into stone, or all three braided together? You circle its base and see how it might be all at once. Ambition, devotion, and geometry stacked like intentions hardened into brick. Even in decline, the Ghurid vision leaves traces. A pointed arch here, a line of Kufic script there, a minaret rib catching the last light. These fragments are not ruins only. They are conversations across centuries. You stand in the hush and feel the breath of those builders still in the walls, urging you to listen. The night comes softly. Lamps flicker in niches, prayers echo low, and the miner glows like a candle stub stretched impossibly tall. Mosques that crumble still whisper, arches that crack still teach. The Ghurids' buildings may vanish, but their design secrets remain, etched in stone for anyone willing to lean close and hear them hum. Evening gathers around the miner until its bands of script look like dark rivers looping a quiet mountain. You stand beneath the stone and feel how the day's warmth drains into the ground, how lamplight trembles in the wind, how the city keeps its voice low, as if listening for something coming over the horizon. The buildings still whisper their lessons, but now those lessons shift. Permanence is a hope, not a guarantee. Height is a promise made to weather and time, not a victory over them. You turn from the courtyard and follow the road that threads north and west, where the first cold drafts of decline slip between the ribs of empire. Neutral narration sets your compass. Ghiyath al-Din Muhammad dies in 1203, the steadier hand of the two brothers gone. One plain fact follows close behind. Mu'izz al-Din Muhammad, the spear point of the Eastern campaigns, is assassinated in 1206 while returning from the Punjab, and with that loss, the Ghurid polity begins to loosen at the seams. Governors who once rode out with crisp orders start writing their own. The web holds, but it creaks. You travel with the creaking, couriers who ride longer, scribes who hedge their phrasing, quartermasters who invent new categories called miscellaneous urgency. In Lahore, a clerk whispers that coins now bear competing names depending on which gate you enter. In Ghazni, a sergeant asks if the next shipment of roof tiles is also a policy statement. You answer yes, because at moments like this, even shingles become ideology. A quirky tidbit clings to the gossip. Some say Mu'izz kept a knife with a jeweled hilt that merchants would ask to borrow simply to touch luck, returning it with theatrical reverence. After his death, a rumor insists the hilt turned dull, as if grief could tarnish metal. It reads like folklore, yet you can feel why the story spread. People wanted to hold on to something that felt like power and found only a handle. Historians still argue whether the assassination was the work of offended tribes, sectarian enemies, or opportunists who sensed the winds turning. Was it a local vendetta, an Ismaili blade, or a convergence of resentments at a dark roadside? The sources quarrel. The dust keeps its secrets. What matters for the road ahead is simpler. A single absence becomes 1,000 decisions made in different directions. Delhi notices first. Qutb al-Din Aibak steadies the city, then is gone himself by 1210, thrown from a horse while playing Chavgan. Calm narration, no gore, the end is quick, the echo long. His death forces rapid recomposition, armies swear to new hands, ledgers find fresh signatures, builders wait at scaffolds until seals resume moving. Iltutmish rises and begins the slow art of turning a commander's camp into a capital that can stand storms. The miner climbs under his watch, stubborn and eloquent. First light joke to ease the knotted brow. A stonecutter points at the tower and says, "When rulers change, our scaffolds don't. We just climb a little slower so nobody notices the paperwork." His partner replies, "You'll notice it when your lunch goes missing." Laughter scuffs the dust and the mallet taps resume. Westward, the weather breaks harder. The Khwarezmian tide swells from Transoxiana into Khorasan, opportunistic and fast. Herat's merchants learn new names for old taxes. Governors rehearse new formulations of loyalty. Neutral aside, by the second decade of the 13th century, Khwarezmian pressure seizes key towns once solidly in the Ghurid orbit, stripping the heartland even as Delhi holds. The map that once looked like a single garment now frays into patches. Then, another wind arrives from deeper steppe. Scouts bring stories first, riders who move like arrows and fight like weather. Traders call them a rumor, refugees call them a direction. By 1271, the Mongols strike Herat with a force that makes dates and titles irrelevant. Chroniclers remember a city stilled. You keep the picture gentle, shutters bowed, courtyards empty, calligraphy smudged by ash that refuses to leave the pores of brick. Prayer continues where it can. Markets come back because mouths must, but the bruise under the surface does not fade. You climb again to Firuzku in your mind and find absence arranged like furniture. The lanes you walked now feel too wide. Walls shrug at their foundations. Neutral narration notes what later writers repeat. The mountain capital is taken and unmade in the early 1220s, its proud silhouette folded into rock. Dates shift by source, the conclusion does not. The jewel in the ridges becomes a silence. Second light joke slips in sideways, careful not to poke wounds. A shepherd picking through tumbled stones mutters, "At least the stairs are shorter now." His companion answers, "Yes, and the views are mostly horizontal." Humor here is a blanket, thin but warm enough to keep the cold from your throat. Back on the plains, Delhi leans into durability. Iltutmish signs, inspects, appoints, and rides. The courts keep rhythms, the Friday lines fill, the minar builds. Yet news at the edges stays rough. In Sindh, Kubacha tests independence and finds rivers treacherous both in channel and politics. In the Punjab, forts flicker between banners. The old Ghurid habit, sword first, minaret second, no longer fits a world where storms arrive in weeks, not years. Survival now means ledgers that balance and walls that do not boast. You pause under the iron pillar again. Its surface still shrugs off rust. A child touches it and asks if it is magic. The guard says no. Then, after a longer pause, yes. He means the daily magic. Men who show up, women who queue water, scribes who bargain with ink, singers who keep nights soft. Empires fall, but the recipe for morning survives. Historians still argue whether the Ghurids should be labeled conquerors who built or builders who conquered. In decline, the question tastes different. The mosques remain even when the names on the khutbah change. The schools keep their benches even when the endowments are written in new hands. The roads wear grooves that remember all hooves the same. Maybe the category never mattered to the stones. Maybe it mattered only to rulers who thought history keeps score. Third light joke returns to the ledger. A harried treasurer tells a Qadi, "We have 2 lines in the budget, roof repairs and unexpected roof repairs." The Qadi nods. Add a third, the prayer for roofs. They both sign, because signatures are a kind of prayer too. Night lowers over Lahore, Ghazni, Herat, names that once rang like iron and now sound like hollow bowls waiting for grain. You walk each courtyard in memory and find someone sweeping, someone reciting, someone checking the sky for rain. The Ghurid dream is not a single building fallen. It is a network relaxing into the earth, its energy passing into those who come next. The slave generals become sultans, and their heirs take the stage with scripts rewritten but props familiar. Towers, courts, markets, recitations, the play goes on with a different title card. You return to the minaret at Delhi as moonlight threads its flutes. The tower's not finished, not perfect, and not safe from time, but it is higher than yesterday, and the letters around its waist are still legible if you tilt your head and step close. You read a line aloud under your breath and hear how stone returns the sound with patience. The Ghurids have slipped into shadow, yes, but shadow's not nothing. It is the cool place where memory keeps shape, where later hands can trace what earlier hands believed was worth lifting against gravity. In the hush, a breeze moves through the courtyard and lifts a fine dust that smells of lime, clay, ink, and old cedar. You breathe it and know that decline is not the opposite of making. It is the other half of the sentence that making begins. Tomorrow, another crew will climb the scaffolds, another judge will listen. Another child will learn a verse and look up at a sky that has forgotten more empires than she will ever memorize. You step back from the tower and accept the realism of it all. The dream ends, the work remains, and the morning still needs someone to open the gate. Dawn in Delhi paints the miner the color of copper coins, and the city stirs as quietly as a cat deciding whether to acknowledge breakfast. You keep walking from the shadow of the tower into streets where vendors lift shutters, sweep dust into obedient piles, and argue amiably with the new day. What the Ghurid started does not stop. It mutates. Stone learns new accents. Prayers keep their time, but titles on the khutbah change like the hands on a clock. You move with that slow turn, watching how later rulers reach back, borrow forward, and call the result continuity. Neutral narration lays a line. After the brothers fall and their domains splinter, Delhi's new sultans, first the Mamluk line shaped by former slaves like Iltutmish, then Khaljas, then Tughlaqs, build directly on Ghurid foundations. One plain fact shines from the complex itself. Iltutmish completes major stages of the Qutb Minar and expands the Quwat al-Islam, while Alauddin Khalji adds the Alai Darwaza in 1311 with true arches and a cool geometry of red sandstone and white marble. Later, Firoz Shah Tughlaq repairs the miner after lightning scars it, topping it with fresh stories that read like a different script on the same page. Repair, add, repeat, the complex becomes a palimpsest of authority. You pass under the Alai Darwaza's vault, where crisp Kufic bands and pierced stone screens sift light into lace. The air tastes like shade. Your fingertips trace a line of calligraphy that feels more like engineering than ornament, each stroke a rib helping the arch remember its curve. This gate does not erase the Ghurid courtyard, it reframes it, like a new stanza in the same long poem. A quirky tidbit flutters from the guides. Hug the old iron pillar, and your wish comes true, they say. At least that was the game before fences arrived. People once stood with their backs to the metal, tried to clasp hands around it, and proclaimed fortune if fingers met. The pillar stays indifferent as always, a stoic roommate to centuries of enthusiasms. You grin and keep your distance. History is heavy enough without you trying to lift it. You circle the vast base of the Alai Minar, the tower Alauddin planned to dwarf the Qutb, a foundation as wide as a small plaza and as final as a punctuation mark that never received its sentence. Workers once stacked the first rough courses, then time tugged the funding loose. The stump remains, honest about ambition's half-life. Historians still argue whether the project stalled from money, engineering doubts, or simple dynastic turbulence. Was it arithmetic, masonry, or politics that cut the cord? You run a palm over the coarse stone and feel three answers nodding at once. Delhi's streets tilt you forward into later neighborhoods where mosques echo early sultanate habits, broad courtyards, pointed arches, teaching niches tucked beside law benches. You watch qadis unroll documents like carpets, weigh oaths, and send disputants away, lighter or heavier depending on the record. The administrative spine the Ghurids planted now flexes with new muscles. In workshops nearby, stonecutters rehearse the same alphabet of leaves and loops you saw in earlier courtyards. Only the rhythm has shifted. Less mountain austerity, more city flourish. The tune changes, the measure holds. First light joke for the morning. A plasterer points at a wall and announces, "This finish will last 100 years." A clerk replies, "Only if you sign an affidavit." The plasterer says he'll settle for tea, which is both cheaper and more enforceable. Your path widens into memory of the West. Herat breathes again under new patrons, the Kartids patching, the Timurids later transforming. Neutral aside clarifies the thread. The Friday Mosque at Herat, first fostered under Ghurid rule, is rebuilt and embellished across the 14th and 15th centuries until its courts glow with a Timurid grammar of blue. What begins as mountain-born resolve evolves under different hands into a city-scale lyric. The seed was Ghurid, the flower answers to many gardeners. You stand at a Delhi bookstall where a copyist sells a text on geometry next to a manual of law next to a Sufi verse collection about patience and brickwork. You flip a page and find a margin note that reads, "Measure twice, invoke thrice." The scribe shrugs. Sometimes religion and math agree. Second light joke lands as a customer asks if the price includes binding. "Yes," says the copyist, "but the binding includes a price." Everyone nods. Delhi is fluent in these exchanges. Back at the complex, a guide with a sun-faded turban names every phase of the minor as if introducing relatives at a wedding. This band by Aibak, that height by Iltutmish, this upper grace by Firoz Shah. He points to a scar where an earthquake once took its tax and to a patch where repair argues gently with original craft. You listen and hear the larger sentence. Later dynasties claim the Ghurid script by reading aloud from it, altering a word, adding a clause, keeping the cadence. Another curiosity surfaces in bizarre chatter. Some swear that Alauddin Khalji also dreamed of enclosing the whole complex with a second grand mosque that would make the first seem modest, a city within a city of arcades upon arcades. The plan never resolves. Delhi always prefers an ellipsis. Whether that dream was practical drawing or political theater remains fogged, but the rumor fits a ruler whose appetite was famously ambitious. You cross to Ajmer in your mind, where Adhaid Ka Jonpra keeps its forest of spolia columns and perforated screens, a reminder that the Ghurid Delhi grammar traveled by template and team. Architects there experiment with proportion, preachers there shape voices to new acoustics. The result is neither copy nor rupture, but a braid. Historians still argue whether such sites should be read mostly as instruments of dominion or as places where craftspeople, under constraint, forged a fresh regional style. You hold the question the way a mason holds a chisel, lightly but ready. Third light joke rolls in as a young apprentice presents his first carved band to the master. "Perfect," the master says, "except for spacing, line, depth, polish, and spelling." The apprentice bows, delighted. In Delhi, 5 problems equal 1 career path. Evening leans across the complex and the minor warms from copper to ember. A group gathers near the mosque's edge. Some recite, some trade cloth, some sketch the tower's flutes like musicians trying to learn a melody by ear. You realize the legacy has 2 halves. One is institutional. Courts, tax ledgers, endowments, passed along like tools in a workshop. The other is atmospheric, an attitude that stone should aspire, that law should anchor, that prayer should give the geometry its reason. Later rulers inherit both and remix them. Neutral narration adds a final anchoring fact. The Delhi Sultanate that hardens here will in time be replaced by new houses, Sayyids, Lotus, then Mughals, each layering mosques and gates over the city's old bones. Yet the first insistence that Delhi can be a Muslim capital grows from the Ghurid moment. You see it every time the Adhan floats and finds walls prepared to catch it. The lamps come up, the iron pillar drinks starlight without complaint. A boy asks his father who built the tower. The father answers with 3 names and a shrug, then adds, "Many hands." That is the cleanest truth you've heard all day. You step back through the Alai Darwaza, noticing how the gate frames the miner like a gentle hand frames a candle, and you understand how echoes work in stone. They do not repeat exactly. They rhyme. Night settles heavy over Delhi. You walk beneath the miner, its ribs catching moonlight like the strings of a silent instrument. The courtyard lies quiet, only a few lamps guttering in niches, their glow trembling against weathered stone. You feel the hush of centuries, the kind that arrives not with sudden collapse, but with long exhale. The Ghurids are gone. The buildings remain. The stories, scattered but stubborn, still breathe through cracks. Tonight, you walk among ruins that remember more than they reveal. Neutral narration steadies your steps. By the early 13th century, Mongol invasions tear through Khorasan and the Ghurid highlands. Firuzkoh is destroyed, Herat battered, and Ghazni diminished. One plain fact: after Mu'izz's death in 1206, the empire fragments quickly, with commanders and successors founding their own dynasties, Delhi rising into its own sultanate, others faltering under pressure. The Ghurid name fades, yet their imprint becomes foundation for new powers. You pass into Firuzkoh, again in imagination. Where once the Friday mosque glistened with turquoise, now only broken bases lie under starlight. Shepherds lead flocks across stones that once bore jurists and poets. A fox scampers across the courtyard as if rehearsing a sermon. The city that once believed itself eternal has become a memory stitched into grass. A quirky tidbit lingers. Travelers centuries later swore villagers near Firuzkoh could still hear phantom calls to prayer from beneath the soil, as though the earth had memorized the cadence. Folklore, yes, but standing here, you half expect the mountain to exhale a forgotten echo. Historians still argue whether the Ghurid fall was inevitable, caused by internal strain, overextension, and fragile roots, or whether, had the Mongols arrived a century later, the Ghurids might have joined the list of long-lasting houses. Was it geography, timing, or simply history's appetite for fresh names? You breathe the cold air and let the question hang, unanswered. You wander on to Ghazni, where ruined mosques sprawl like interrupted sentences. Arches lead nowhere. Minarets tilt, their inscriptions eroded, yet prayer mats still appear in corners cleared of rubble, and voices still rise in dawn rhythm. First light joke softens the silence. A weary villager tells you, "These ruins make fine windbreaks. History is drafty, but at least it keeps the sheep warm." Back in Delhi, the Quwwat ul-Islam still stands. Later rulers have repaired and added, but in the stones you trace the first Ghurid lines. The miner climbs higher now, though patched by other dynasties. You step close and run your hand across a fluted rib. Dust gathers in your palm, but beneath it you feel the steady groove carved 8 centuries ago. Stone remembers what names forget. Second joke drifts from the scaffolding where masons mutter, "We patch the tower every generation. By now it's more plaster than plan." Their overseer shrugs, so are most empires. Evening deepens. The mosque courtyard empties, save for a few children chasing each other among columns recycled from temples long gone. The pillars tell a story no decree could control: conquest, reuse, adaptation, faith and craft intertwined. You pause beneath one and realize it is less a ruin than a conversation. Further west, Herat stirs in your memory. The Friday mosque, patched and rebuilt, gleams again under later dynasties. The Ghurid layer is buried beneath Khartid and Timurid brilliance, but without that first Ghurid push, the later jewel might never have set. Legacies are often foundations mistaken for footnotes. Third and final joke for the night rises from a scribe in Herat's bazaar. He squints at a cracked tile and says, "It's still legible. It reads, 'Replace me.'" His apprentice replies, "That's not calligraphy. That's my handwriting." They laugh, and the sound feels like repair. You return to Delhi's miner once more. Stars scatter behind it, sharp as hammered nails. The tower is no longer just Ghurid. It is a palimpsest of dynasties, each repairing, adding, claiming. Yet, in its bones, the Ghurid impulse still hums, to rise, to inscribe, to endure. You tilt your head back until the ribs blur against the sky. The night air is cool, the ruins quiet, the empire gone but not erased. The stories have slipped into stone, into memory, into the patient silence of places that refuse to be fully forgotten. Slow your steps now. The courtyards you crossed, the ridges you climbed, the markets and mosques you entered, all of them dim into stillness. The Ghurids rose from mountains where winters pressed hard, built cities in valleys where caravans argued, raised towers that stretched into the clouds, and then fell back into the silence of earth. Empires always end, but stories linger, and stones remember more than they are asked to. Imagine the miner under moonlight, its flutes dark and silver, standing watch while the city sleeps. Around it lie fragments of arches, inscriptions worn smooth, and pathways where countless sandals scuffed the dust. Close your eyes and let that scene soften. The wind becomes a slow breath, the ruins a cradle of memory. You're no longer walking through campaigns or arguments. You're resting among echoes that fade gently, like ripples settling on a still pond. Let your body ease into that rhythm. Feel how the harsh clang of battles has quieted into a lull, how the weight of towers has lightened into calm silhouettes. The mountains, once sharp with ambition, are now blue shadows under starlight. The courtyards, once crowded with traders and scribes, are empty but safe, their stones cool and smooth. Breathe deeply, and let the past fold itself away like a manuscript gently closed. The story is finished, the voices have quieted, and only calm remains. If you listen closely, you may still hear the faint hum of prayers drifting in the dark, steady as a heartbeat, softer than a whisper. Let that sound carry you into rest. The empire is gone, the night is kind, and your dreams are waiting. The end, sweet dreams.